Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees. Here's tonight's top story. On the second day of the COP26 climate summit, leaders from more than 100 countries agreed to end deforestation by 2030.
And that means more leaders than ever before have now signed up to protect our forests, from countries in the north and the south with temperate forests, tropical forests.
Also tonight, the government welcomes France postponing its threat of a blockade on British fishing boats and goods, with the two sides set to have talks later this week. And the new budget is estimated to raise the UK's tax burden to the highest level in decades. But the Chancellor says the spending will boost quality of life and will come down again before the next election. Leaders from more than 100 countries have promised to end deforestation by 2030. These countries cover 85% of the world's forests, including the Amazon. Poor countries will receive funding for land reforestation. It's the first major deal in the COP26 climate summit, and Downing Street says the promises are already backed by over £14 billion in investment. NTD's Al Rhodes has the story.
Good morning, everybody, my fellow leaders, and thank
Boris Johnson has hailed a pledge by more than 100 international leaders to end what he called the Great Chainsaw Massacre of the world's forests. On the second day of the COP26 summit in Glasgow, 110 nations signed a declaration to halt and reverse deforestation and land degradation by 2030. These countries cover 85% of the world's forests, including the Amazon rainforest.
And that means more leaders than ever before have now signed up to protect our forests, from countries in the north and the south with temperate forests, tropical forests, and including nations like China, Russia, Brazil, some of the largest forest estates in the world. And
Downing Street said the pledges have been backed by nearly £9 billion of public funding, with a further over £5 billion in private investment. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos promised £1.5 billion for land restoration in Africa, double what he previously committed just a day earlier at an event with the Prince of Wales.
And what is most significant about this declaration is not just the range of countries coming together, but also that we're working in partnership with the private sector, with philanthropists, with indigenous people and local communities, to address the economic drivers of deforestation. And
President Joe Biden also announced a new plan to conserve global forests by bringing together the US government's diplomatic, financial and policy tools.
This plan is the first of its kind, taking a whole-of-government approach and working in our case with Congress to deploy up to $9 billion in U.S. funding through 2030 to conserve and restore our forests and mobilize billions more from our partners.
In a video statement to the climate summit, President Vladimir Putin said Russia was relying on its forests to reach the goal of carbon neutrality by 2060.
We take the strongest and most vigorous measures to conserve it. We improve forest management and fight illegal logging and forest fires. We are expanding reforestation areas. We have been consistently increasing funding for these purposes.
And a £1.1 billion fund will be established to protect the Congo Basin tropical rainforest, the world's second largest. The president of the Democratic Republic of the Congo welcomed the pact and said the Congo Basin is exposed to the risk of deforestation.
Within the framework of the effective implementation of the Agreement of Paris, it is imperative to consider mitigating these risks, otherwise it would result in a major ecological crisis.
Outside the conference hall, some observers said actions are more important than promises.
The world leaders have to commit to these claims and they have to follow through, because we haven't seen any follow through. It's been years of committing to ending emissions by 2050, and now we see that India is pushing for 2070.
Well, it's great that they actually agreed on that. I mean, it's a big step forward, but I think it's a bit problematic that it's in 10 years. We need action now.
During the summit, governments of 28 countries also committed to a roadmap for sustainable trade to save tropical forests. In many countries, forests were cut to make way for commercial agricultural products such as palm oil, soya and cocoa. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
The United States and the European Union today announced at COP26 that about 100 nations have joined their Global Methane Pledge. They have committed themselves to cut emissions of the potent greenhouse gas methane as part of efforts to contain global warming. Analysts say fixing leaky oil and gas infrastructure is the fastest and cheapest way to curb methane emissions. We got more from NTD's Neil Woodrow.
The US President and the head of the European Union on Tuesday in Glasgow officially launched their Global Methane Pledge.
So together, we're committing to collectively reduce our methane by 30% by 2030, and I think we could probably go beyond that.
Methane has a higher heat-trapping potential than CO2, but breaks down in the atmosphere faster. That means that cutting methane could have a rapid impact on reining in global warming.
So cutting back on methane emissions is one of the most effective things we can do to reduce near-term global warming and keep 1.5 degrees Celsius. It is the lowest hanging fruit.
Analysts say fixing leaky oil and gas infrastructure is the fastest and cheapest way to curb methane emissions. The US President says tackling methane could also be an opportunity to grow jobs.
This isn't just something we have to do to protect the environment in our future. It's an enormous opportunity for all of us, all of our nations, to create jobs and make meeting climate goals a core part of our global economic recovery as well.
Almost 100 countries have joined the pact. A UN report in May said steep cuts in methane emissions this decade could avoid nearly 0.3 degrees Celsius of global warming by the 2040s.
The United States is eager to work with each of you to make sure we meet this goal and encourage more countries to join us in committing to reducing methane globally, because there are more that can join and should.
The pledge, first announced in September, now includes half of the top 30 methane emitters, accounting for 2/3 of the global economy. Top 5 methane emitters, China, Russia and India, have not signed up. Neil Woodrow, NTD News.
Amid pledges to cut carbon emissions at COP26 in Glasgow, India, for the first time, committed itself to a net zero goal. The country's Prime Minister laid out 5 targets to reduce use of fossil fuels and increase renewable energy capacity. India is the 3rd largest emitter of CO2, and more than 50% of the country's electricity comes from coal. This report is from NTD's Joy Duguid.
India's Prime Minister said on Monday his country would aim to stop adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere by 2070. That's 2 decades after the US, Europe and the UK, and 10 years later than China. At COP26 in Glasgow, Modi presented what he called the gift of 5 elixirs to fight climate change.
Pehla, Bharat 2030 tak.
Firstly, India will increase its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030. Secondly, India will fulfill 50% of its energy requirements from renewable energy sources by 2030. Thirdly, between now and 2030, India will reduce its total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons. Fourthly, by 2030, India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by 45%. And fifthly, by 2070, India will achieve the target of net zero emissions.
Verse 2070 tak Bharat net zero ka lakshya hasil karega.
It won't be easy for India to wean itself off fossil fuels. More than 50% of the country's electricity comes from coal. And for nearly 4 million people in India, their livelihoods are directly or indirectly linked to coal. India is the third largest emitter of CO2. Joy Dugid, NTD News.
Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby on Monday apologised for comparing the threat of climate change to the rise of the Nazis. He said world leaders who fail to act on climate change could be making a bigger mistake than their predecessors who ignored warnings about the rise of the Nazis. Welby wrote on Twitter, "It's never right to make comparisons with the atrocities brought by the Nazis, and I'm sorry for the offence caused to Jews by these words." While attending COP26 in Glasgow, Welby told the BBC, "People will speak of them in far stronger terms than we speak of the politicians who ignored what was happening in Nazi Germany." He also said world leaders will be cursed if they fail to reach an agreement on climate change. France has postponed its threat to impose a blockade on British fishing boats and goods, a move welcomed by the UK government. The two sides will have talks to settle the fishing licence row later this week. Meanwhile, a seized British boat has still not been released, and French fishing boats are told to be careful when fishing in British waters. NTD's Eddie Aiken has the story.
Britain has welcomed France having stepped back from threats to impose punitive action in a dispute over post-Brexit fishing licences. Environment Secretary George Eustace acknowledged a de-escalation from French President Emmanuel Macron.
Well, it has in the sense that France has clearly been taking a decision not to implement some of the measures that they threatened last Wednesday. We very much welcome that. But I think there's going to be a really important meeting on Thursday between Lord Frost and his opposite number, not just on fisheries, but on a wider range of issues as well.
France had threatened to bar British boats from some of its ports and tighten checks on boats and trucks carrying British goods from Monday midnight if no solution was found. They claim the UK authorities are refusing to grant licences to French boats. Britain says it has granted 98% of applications from EU vessels, and now the dispute comes down to just a few dozen French boats with insufficient paperwork.
We've always been clear that we're open to further dialogue on that, and that if there's new evidence that can be brought to bear, then obviously we would consider that. We want to licence any vessel that qualifies under the terms of the agreement we reached a year ago.
The Environment Secretary told Sky News he understood a British vessel impounded during the diplomatic storm has now been released by France. A spokesman later said the minister had misspoken. Its owner told Reuters his boat is still being held in France. He said the vessel will remain at the port of Le Havre at least until a hearing tomorrow. On the other side, the Regional Sea Fishing Committee for Northern France advised its members to steer clear of British waters in case they are caught up in tit-for-tat British measures.
I think the slightest problem could cause a significant issue and fines and boats to be impounded, especially as there is a huge media impact on the British side as well, where British fishermen are waiting for something like this to happen to get into it.
Brexit Minister Lord Frost and France's Europe Minister Clement Beaune will meet in Paris on Thursday. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
A new budget is estimated to raise Britain's tax burden to the highest levels since post-war Labour administration. Appearing before the Commons Treasury Committee on Monday, Chancellor Rishi Sunak said higher taxes could boost quality of life. But he also insisted he will aim to bring the tax burden down by the next general election. NTD's Malcolm Hudson has more on this story.
Chancellor Rishi Sunak on Monday defended hiking taxes on Britons by saying the money would be spent on public services. Analysts say the tax burden is at a level not seen since the 1950s. Sunak said before the Commons Treasury Committee he would prefer not to raise taxes. He stressed on how services would better help the people who need them.
We can look at the taxes, and yes, people are paying more. They're going to pay the new health and social care levy. No one is pretending otherwise, right? That takes money from people. That's why I, in an ideal world, prefer not to have to put taxes up on people. but you do get something for that money, right? It's all very well to just look at the taxes without looking at what you're getting. And on that particular thing, what are people getting? Well, they're going to get the fact that, them or their family member is going to wait less for an elective surgery that they've been waiting to have, or they're going to get a better experience of social care.
The increases have caused dismay among many Conservative MPs at a time when rising prices have left many families facing a potential cost of living squeeze. Sunak said the set of measures would benefit those on the lowest incomes most.
And because of the significant investment in public services that those taxes are paying for, as you can see in the distribution analysis in the budget, it is a highly progressive set of measures, which mean those on the lowest incomes and the lowest deciles are the ones that are benefiting disproportionately more than everyone else.
Sunak said the tax hikes are to help the NHS recover from the pandemic and to fund reforms in social care systems. He also said it is his goal to bring taxes back down again over the remainder of this Parliament. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Still to come, Russia is undergoing a non-working week by order of President Putin. Authorities hope the measure will curb rising virus cases in the country. That and more after the break. The Ukrainian capital has brought in new restrictions for people who are not vaccinated against COVID-19. This means that unvaccinated people can no longer use public transport, visit public venues, or even go to work unless they provide a negative test. Venues such as restaurants and hotels can only remain open if all their employees are vaccinated or have a negative test. This report comes from NTD's Cost M&S.
The Ukrainian capital has brought in new restrictions for people who have not received COVID jabs. Unvaccinated residents of Kiev will no longer be able to go to work or visit public places unless they have tested negative. Some residents see the restrictions as unfair. This lady says it's wrong to deprive people of the chance to move freely around the city and go to work. Others are in favor of the new rules, aimed at boosting vaccination rates. This man says those who have not been jabbed should just stay at home. Restaurants, hotels and fitness centers will remain open if 100% of their employees are vaccinated or have negative daily tests.
This is an adaptive quarantine. Some areas of activity are in lockdown mode, but we have exceptions for fully vaccinated people. If your staff or your customers are vaccinated, you can work.
Ukraine has one of the slowest jab rates in Europe, with only around 17% of people fully vaccinated. Cost M&S, NTD News.
Now to Russia. The country is currently in a non-working week, as ordered by President Vladimir Putin. It's aimed at tackling a surge in COVID-19 infections and hopes to keep people out of offices and off public transport. Although some are taking the opportunity to fly to popular holiday destinations. The non-working week started on Saturday for most areas. One region has decided to extend its non-working period for a second week as cases continue to rise. NTD's Eddie Aiken tells us more.
What's known as non-working days in Russia have started and are expected to last for most areas until Sunday. It's like paid leave for most workers, but with a purpose. Authorities are closing many workplaces and imposing other restrictions all over the country. They say it will curb the spread of COVID-19.
I think it will help. I see that people are not very eager to get vaccinated. But I do hope they will now go and get the jab. I don't think it will help. I don't believe such measures can help at all. It's a non-working week, but people still work.
Businesses are expected to lose over £40 million per day during this period. Putin said workers' salaries should still be paid during this time. But government aid is reportedly limited to loans matching the country's minimum wage at around £130 per month.
It would have helped if everybody really stayed home and didn't go to Egypt and Turkey, Dubai, Maldives. So I do not know. Let's see then.
Moscow has been under partial lockdown since last Thursday. Shops, except pharmacies and supermarkets, must be shut until Sunday. Residents in Moscow that are unvaccinated and over 60 have been locked down for 4 months. Eddie Aiken, NTD News.
Going to Holland, soon visitors to Amsterdam may spot a self-driving watercraft the size of a small car cruising silently through its ancient canals. It's hoped the new boats will one day help to alleviate congestion in the capital city's narrow streets. NTD's El Rhodes brings us this report.
This is the electric-powered rowboat. It's a catchier name than autonomous floating vehicle and part of a project to transform the use of the city's waterways.
So we have a lot of road traffic and congestion, e-commerce logistics that is cluttering the small streets in the inner city, while at the same time we have a lot of open water available in the canals that is not being used anymore for transport, only for tourists.
One of the first uses of the rowboat to be tested is for rubbish collection. Bin lorries on the city's narrow streets are a safety hazard and cause traffic congestion. Instead, rowboats stationed at the waterside will act as floating rubbish containers.
And we only need about 140 different containers placed near the quay walls, and then several smart rowboats picking up these container boats and bring them to the waste collection company in the port of Amsterdam.
The rowboat is not yet allowed to enter the city's canals with passengers on board, but in the longer term it's hoped the quiet and gentle speed of the boat will provide an enjoyable experience for people to get around.
With the software that we developed, you can plan your route. So if you want to go from A to B, it automatically calculates the most efficient route to sail. Then when it's sailing, it senses and maps the environment.
Rowboat was developed so that different units can be linked together. Linking rowboats will be able to create more structures like barges or temporary bridges. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
And now to Switzerland. The impact of food waste on climate emissions is an increasing concern for many. A Swiss community association is connecting orchards, volunteers and fruit presses. NTD's Postpones tells us more about the movement to combat apple waste.
It's apple harvest season in Switzerland, but some fruit orchard owners don't have time to collect all of them, and many are left unpicked to rot. Amélie Gosselin can't find the time or the energy to make the best of the apples her orchard produces.
It's a lot of maintenance. Last year we were able to pick some, but to our regret we were not able to pick everything. We invited friends to help, but it was not enough to pick all the apples we had.
Now a new community association has come to the rescue. Brothers Yvan and Gail Morin want SOS Fruit to reduce food waste. The idea came to them after helping one of their neighbors pick his fruit trees 3 years ago.
There is plenty of fruit trees that are left abandoned. I think the main reason is that people have forgotten the habit and value of these fruits, so it's easier to go and buy fruit from the Migros supermarket than to harvest their own fruit.
SOS Fruit connects volunteers with fruit tree owners online, and the picked produce is divided up.
It's an excellent idea and everyone is a winner. It's almost revolting to think that these would have gone wasted. Now it will be used either for juice or consumed by the volunteers. I think it greatly reduces food waste.
The apples are taken to a local fruit press to make juice. SOS Fruit brings approximately 3 tons of apples here throughout the season. The juice is pasteurized and bagged into 3 or 5 litre containers, ready for sale. A 5 litre juice box costs about £8. Cyril Meillifer owns the fruit press. He says he's delighted with initiatives like SOS Fruit.
It's a success because they have done something that is sustainable, and that has been ongoing for 2 years so far, so that's very important. Fruit tree owners have found an economical use for their trees or old orchards. It encourages them to maintain them and to plant more, which is the main objective we are looking for.
After the harvest, the volunteers sort the remaining fruit to take home their share. Some are regulars and others have joined for the first time. Today's apple orchard was successfully stripped of all its fruit, with approximately £1,400 harvested. Postpones, NTD News.
after becoming a Guinness World Record holder and defeating opponents many years his junior. 97-year-old tennis player Leonid Stanislavski could be forgiven for wanting to take it easy. But instead, he challenged one of the world's biggest tennis stars to a match. He even asked the tennis authorities to add an extra category to their tournaments for the over 90s. NTD's Lorraine Ferrier brings us this story.
Leonid Stanislavski holds the Guinness World Record for the world's oldest tennis player. The 97-year-old Ukrainian took part in the 2021 Super Seniors World Championship in Spain. There he had a chance to play against tennis legend Rafael Nadal.
It is an elegant sport. It is a good physical exercise, a beautiful game. And there is one more thing about tennis. You can play tennis no matter what age you are. I started playing tennis when I was 30 years old. I am now 97 years old and keep playing.
The International Tennis Federation introduced a 90 and over age group in the tournament after Stanislavski sent a written request. Stanislavski has been playing amateur tennis for over half a century and says he cannot find a worthy adversary in his age group. That has not stopped him from outplaying younger competitors in the championship for seniors.
My dream is not simply to live up to 100 years old, but to remain active and at least be able to play tennis. Probably I won't be a strong tennis player anymore, but I want to play, even if not with much strength. I dream to meet prominent tennis players.
Stanislavski said the secret to his longevity was a mixture of good genes and regular sport. He starts each morning with gymnastics, push-ups and pull-ups. Stanislavski is a passionate fan of swimming and skiing and dreams of doing a parachute jump. Lorraine Ferrier, NTD News.
That's the news for today. Have a good evening. Thank you for watching our daily news show on YouTube. You can also watch our other programming on channel 190 on Sky TV or on Freeview via channel box on channel 271. In the meantime though, please give this video a like and hit subscribe to our channel. Have a good day.